Let's talk first to Adam, who's calling in from North Carolina. Adam, you are live on Truth Wanted. What's up?
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Alice and Objectively Dan. I just have to I cannot follow up with that last call and give it justice and give you as much entertainment. But if you go back in time really quickly, 50 years, and you look at the veterinary industry, it'd be all men. And you'd say, man, look at these men doing veterinary work. It's men doing work. And now you go to the future and it's women. So it's just norms in society that there's no rhyme or reason. Go ahead, Dan.
Absolutely. I was about to say, look at teachers, right? Teaching was supposed to be a male profession. It literally says in the Bible that women aren't even allowed to teach in the church, because that's too sacred. And let alone in education in America, it was almost purely men. And yeah, you see these switches and roles. So yeah, I agree. His point was bullshit. So we find some common ground there, Adam. What do you want to talk to us about today?
Well, sure, and thank you so much for taking my call, and thank you, Alice, for being on the show. My call is related to that caller is misusing science in many ways on the Christian side.
Adam, no. Really? You think so?
Okay, good. I thought I was being a little too harsh on this, but a little hard to read the cues from you. But I think there's also some misuse of science, and I'll go into why on the atheist side. And my topic is that atheists are constantly misusing the null hypothesis in statistics. Constantly. It drives me crazy. It grinds my gears.
Okay. Elaborate on that.
Sure. So the null hypothesis in statistics is basically any initial belief. Any initial belief. Your crazy friend, let's call them Nathan, might believe the world is flat. A crazy belief. So that could be their null hypothesis. It's just what they believe. Now, you would offer to them an alternative hypothesis. And one of the big problems why I think it's being used by the kind of supernatural claims is because we have to be able to test it to come to a p-value. A p-value is the probability of our results or results from our strain given that the null hypothesis is true. So if you were to present to your friend Nathan experiments that would show, like the Cavendish experiment. I'm not the best flat earth debater, but if you presented experiments that showed evidence the earth is not flat, you wouldn't disprove. So we wouldn't say we disprove the earth is flat. We would say there's sufficient evidence to reject the null hypothesis. So we never really prove the null. We don't disprove the null. We only reject or fail to reject the null hypothesis. So it's kind of shoring up some wording. It kind of just, I don't know your thoughts or Alice's thoughts on this, but every time I hear people being like, the null hypothesis is atheism, or we don't have any burden of proof. The burden of proof is another conversation, but the null hypothesis just really drives me crazy when it's used.
Yes, you're absolutely right. So I briefly taught statistics as a tutor for a while. Well, parts, I mean, I taught up to like pre-calculus and like related stuff. So like I didn't go into the high concept stuff, like talking about the null hypothesis. I mostly like tutored for high school students and middle school students. But like, you're absolutely right. People misuse this all the time when they're talking about the null hypothesis, when we're talking about things that are more likely to be true. We're exactly talking about that. We're talking about what we expect to see versus what we actually see. That's really what we mean, right? So there's some that will argue that, well, we don't even know what it would be like to know whether there is a God or not. And so this whole null hypothesis argument really kind of falls apart if you have that viewpoint. There's, things to suggest about particular kinds of gods that you can work with. So if you have a God that, maybe exists, but also like creates the physical world in the way that we tend to see it today, and like, follows the normal rules that we think of and has no supernatural intervention, that's going to be different than the God that we expect to see intervening, right? And actually doing things in the world. So then you might be able to use, something with the null hypothesis in the sense of expected outcome versus what's actually observed. But again, like, it all depends on how you define God and what kind of God you're talking about, because they are going to be a bit different there. What you think about that, Alice?
Yeah.
What I hear, so I'm not familiar with the null hypothesis, if I'm even pronouncing that correctly, but what I hear is it sounds to me, just off of the snippet, It sounds to me kind of like the opposite of saying that the burden of proof rests with the person who is claiming something. What I'm hearing you say about the null hypothesis is it's kind of the opposite, like the burden of proof rests on the person who's saying that there is not something. Am I interpreting that correctly or no?
No, I think I can use your example, your kind of story. It was great hearing some of your story and coming out as an actress. So when going way back into the early 2000s, let's say 04 or 05, you believed, in God at that time. And so you started to then see evidence that maybe your beliefs were wrong. And at some point you rejected your belief. But now you would consider yourself an atheist. So now your null hypothesis would be atheism. And let's say all of a sudden Dan performed a miracle in front of you, right? Dan, can you do a miracle for us? I think the answer is no.
Oh, Dan, you lost your sound.
No,
don't hear you, Dan.
That was the miracle. It's the miracle of silence from Dan. I'm just kidding. But if Dan were to perform some sort of miracle or something, if Dan were to perform some sort of miracle, that might be sufficient evidence for you to reject your new null hypothesis. So basically the idea is you hold to your belief until there's sufficient evidence to reject your current belief. And then whatever your new belief is, like now it's atheism, that's kind of your current null hypothesis. Like it's just what you currently believe. And then other people have to help you. Go ahead.
So I think I understand you. So a distinction that I'd like to make is I'm quite literal with my use of the English language. And atheism to me and to the dictionary literally means just a without theism, belief in gods or deities. I don't have belief. To me, atheism is the complete absence of belief. So I wouldn't say that I believe in atheism now, and that's become what I would base my null hypothesis on. It's the utter absence of belief. I don't think, I think that there's a spectrum of atheists, just as there's a spectrum of Christians in terms of how fundamentalist or liberal one might find themselves. I lean more in the side of an agnostic atheist. I think everyone's agnostic because who really knows, but I'm comfortable with the term atheist because I don't know, but I don't believe in gods or spirits. And I think that there's like agnostic Christians, agnostic Scientologists. They don't know for sure, but that's what they believe. And so that's what I would say to that is like, I don't think that atheism is a belief system at all. And I know many people see it as like, oh no, that's just a different religion. Now you believe that there is no God. To me, there's a very big difference between saying, I believe there is no God and I don't believe in a God. I'm not saying that there is no God. I just don't believe in one. So I'm not asserting anything up for that would require evidence to back, because to me, it's an absence of something, not a proposition of something.
Real quick, Dan, if I can comment on that, because, and that's exactly right there, Alice, because the null hypothesis requires no evidence. You have no burden. Anyone who offers you an alternative hypothesis must present the data that would not be in line with your null hypothesis, some very unlikely data. Dan, I don't know if you performed miracles while you were on mute, but
I actually did. I did, and I was talking about it. And Adam, you're going to have to watch because I didn't realize I was on mute as I did it. But please go back and watch. I did perform a miracle. Okay.
Well,
but
that might be sufficient evidence to convince us.
And it might be, but
perfect. Go ahead.
On that point, Adam, again, that's defining. Again, the parameters there, which is like, well, if God exists, then we would expect to see miracles in the population, right? Like that's how we're kind of defining things, and that's a very like Christian way to understand the world. Again, there could be a God that exists, but their miracles may or may not be a part of what we would expect to see, right? So like, I think I agree with you in the sense that using the null hypothesis is often misused. I think it can be useful in some sense, but again, this is why I call myself an atheist, right? We can't even have this conversation about God without even defining what that even is or what we would even expect to see in the world. Like we were just having that conversation with Jay, and he was disagreeing about what Christianity really is and what the Bible really says and what we're supposed to be. And people are having these conversations about Christianity every single day. Nobody can figure out what the hell it's supposed to be, because it was all made up anyway. But that's, besides the point, right? I agree. If we're going to have conversations about this in atheist circles, we do need to use our words as accurately as possible. So I appreciate you bringing up your point regardless. Any last thoughts before we get? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I just want to thank you for taking my call and appreciate all your service. I heard you mentioning the secular therapy project to people, but I think you summed it up well there where you said, the distribution we would expect is for miracles to occur. We are outside the range of that distribution, i.e. a low p-value, so we have sufficient evidence via the alpha level point of 5 to reject the null hypothesis of theism. I agree with you.
You're exactly right.
Thank you for your time.
Yes, absolutely, Adam. I 100% agree. And that is how I think most Christians define God in sort of the reality that we exist insofar as miracles exist, right? Miracles happen. There are, but even then, there's post-cessationalists. There's people that say, well, we don't live in a world where miracles happen anymore because of X, Y, and Z. There's theological reasons. And so it is more likely that God is real because this is how we would expect the world to be. There's weird trains of thought you can go with these conversations. But yeah, I agree. People do misuse the null hypothesis because statistics is hard. It's not an easy subject to learn for most people. But anyway, thoughts on that, Alice?
No, I'm going to be Googling the null hypothesis later just to understand it better.
It's a thing people bring up. If we're saying the God of Christianity that exists and Jesus exists and therefore miracles exist, but we don't see miracles, then we can say that maybe we shouldn't have as strong of a belief in these things existing, right? The same reason why I don't think the Mormons are right, because I don't think any of the shit Mormons say is happening. You could talk about this with multiple kinds of religious ideas.